terrible pain for the rest of your life. And I couldn't accept it. And that's where the devastation came in. And that's where the depression came in. And I was like, what are they talking about? I can't do that. And that's when I went, well, wait a second. Let me do my own freaking research and let me see if there's other people in my situation, or are there experts out there that have done something different? Or is there another way for me to do what I want to do by PT or by, some radical surgery or something? So I started at the basis and I just started to research. And when I figured out that I have a certain point in my back that I need to protect. And once I found that and I traced the injury to where it was, then at that point, everything in the world opened up. And I basically was able to find that, hey, you know what? If you run a little bit more on your forefoot, not heel to toe, you're going to reduce impact. If you lean a little bit more forward when you run, you're going to reduce the impact. If you're going to do that, there were certain things. So I started training my body, doing a lot of experimentation, talking to a ton of people. And all of a sudden I was running. Then it was 3 miles and it was 4 miles and I wasn't having any pain.
What is your stand when it comes to doctors of telling you that you can't do this? Because definitely you are not the first one actually saying that. You have, in a way, of ignored what the doctors told you. Actually, you didn't sit down and say, yeah, it's over for me and I can no longer run 5 or more than 2 kilometers of a marathon. Because I remember having a conversation with a guest, whereas she had type 2 diabetes, and she was told that she had, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 4 or 6 weeks to live. So funny thing, and she's still alive today, and that was a very inspiring thing. So in her own view, she was told not to actually question what experts say, question what other people could, not question anything that when it comes to a person of authority. So what is your stance on that?
Well, here's the thing as far as, Western doctors. So this was the one thing that I learned was Western doctors, they're taught to look at their patient as their current potential. So it's current potential. So, all right, with this current potential and what we plan to do, we should be able to heal up that herniation. And as long as he does what he's supposed to do, according to our advice, he shouldn't be in pain as long as he does what he's told to. Eastern medicine looks at the potential holistically. What can happen? So Eastern medicine looks into, okay, this is where he is now. If things can change, and as if they've already done the therapy, they've already done I also did acupuncture, I did massage, I did a lot of different things. If all of these things are included, we can get to this point, right? So I just looked at the Eastern side of it and goes, okay, wait a second. If I'm able to strengthen this muscle, specific muscle, this muscle, and this muscle, which will allow the discs in my back to be held firmly in place. If I learn to if I'm able to learn to tilt my pelvis a little bit more forward when I run, if I'm able to work on not running from heel to toe, but from midfoot to heel, and I can work on kissing the heel, and I get those habits, then I'm going to be able to run again. The doctors don't look at that. It's too detailed on the Western doctor. On the Eastern side, they said, okay, we just need to find where that path is. Once they reach that path, then they can move forward. So as far as mentality goes and what people think, yeah, we've got issues in our world that the experts are saying, well, do this and this, and you might feel a little bit better. Take this medication and you might feel better. What they're not looking at is, wait, if you do these paths, if you follow this path, it might take a while. You know, it might take 3-4 years or whatever. But if you keep following this path and we look at that potential, then you know what, you might even you actually have a more than 95% chance of being happy. But it's going to take this path. Interesting enough, I was part of a study in the military where they were doing some studies on PTSD. And after some soldiers had like really, really rough missions, or they were in combat situations or stuff like that, if they had a certain way of thinking, so hey, once you at least back when I was in, which was years ago now, you were given a psych test. You had to ask a bunch of questions, and you had to fill out this form, and it kind of gave them an idea of how you think, right? And if you had a certain score on the psych test, then and you were in a situation, a combat situation, and there was a risk for PTSD, they would put you into this experimental program. Now, the only drug that was given was low dose Xanax, which is not, it brings your mood level down. It's not necessarily a tranquilizer or a sedative. It's kind of a downer. It's a kind of a depression. I wouldn't say depressive, but it's you know what I mean? It's kind of like a serotonin inhibitor. So it just kind of calms you down. And especially at low dose. High doses, it'll put you to sleep, but in a low dose. But that was the only thing you're given. And then you had to tell the story. You had to tell that back-breaking, traumatizing situation over and over and over and over and over again, like to the tune of 500-600 times. You had to write it. You had to tell it. You had to change characters. You had to tell it as if it was fiction. You had to tell it if it was nonfiction. You had to relive it over again. And when you just thought that you had said it, you had told the story enough times, they move you to a different facility with a bunch of new people, and you got to do it again. And it was over and over and over again. But what it did was it detached itself. So instead of that situation, the soldiers reliving it themselves, all of a sudden they've said it so many times that it almost becomes a movie. It becomes a comic book in their brain. It becomes a book that they read. So when you read a book and you get a really good story, and you can almost like picture everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But you're still detached. But you're like, oh yeah, I can see. I remember reading Robert Ludlum, the Born Supremacy, the Born Ultimatum, the Born series, and it's very descriptive, and it's almost feeling like, oh my God, I'm Jason Bourne. As you're reading it, you're like, you could see everything in your head. But I'm still detached from it. It's still in a form of escapism, right? This becomes, to all these soldiers, it becomes this book that they've read and they've put it back on the shelf. And it's amazing what this can do. Now I don't know where the experimentation ended, but it was only given to a certain score that they would receive, or a certain group of people that had this similar psych test. I don't know if it was a strength of character, or it was, I think if I look back at it and I just think about it, I think it was the ability to compartmentalize. And I'm great. I've always been that way. I've always been able to compartmentalize things, and that might've been it, but I'm not sure.
And it goes back to that thing of, I feel like the Western side, doctors actually treat the symptoms, not actually the cause, the core of it. And actually I'm seeing it the way you're explaining it, explaining the study, I'm seeing it, because if myself was in the army or had a certain traumatic event, and I view it as something that is fictional, it will not have any impact on me. It will actually be like it will seem that I was never in a part of in a combat. I was never in that situation. As much as it is good, but at the same time, just treating the symptoms. And one thing that I realized that actually makes us relive the experience is the fact of triggers. Triggers actually reminds us that no, you were there. And that's how the human body works. And one thing that about Eastern medicines that what I love is a lot is the fact that it doesn't focus on the symptoms, but also cures the core of the problem, cures the core of the problem. Whereas when it comes to, for example, your injury, you mentioned injury, it is very descriptive. Whereas in the Western side, whereas I feel like they have this philosophy that you are not the only patient that is here, so we can't actually dive deeply on actually what you have this and this and this. Why can we help you with this and this? They find an easiest way to tell you the news and saying that you have this and this and this, and not actually going through it. Okay, you can do this, and being able to lend in a way of lend a helping hand. So yeah, and moving on in terms of coaching has another thing that I realized the fact that doing this, I've interviewed a lot of coaches. There's a huge demand of coaches compared to therapists. And even though therapists are still needed because a lot of people are going through a lot when it comes to depression, anxiety, all these things. So what actually made you say that I want to be a coach? I want to help people?
Well, I've always loved doing things for other people and helping people through things. And, my parents have always said stuff like, you should have been a teacher. And where I came from, teachers didn't make all that much money. So how can I possibly do that? But what made me become a coach was I thought about it. So I had done numerous amounts of races, and I had done, this is the third or fourth marathon that I was doing. And that year was a big year for me. In April, I did my first Olympic triathlon. And then in September, I did my first half Ironman. And then I was going to do the Chicago Marathon again. And then I was doing my first Ironman the following month. So we had 20 people on our team for the polycystic kidney disease, running the Chicago Marathon again. And I knew that I couldn't race it. I shouldn't race it or do it to my potential, because 3 weeks later, I'm going to have to not only do the marathon, but I also had to bike 112 miles and swim 2.4. So I knew that I need to, rest up basically. So I was just going to do this as a training run. I was just going to go out and do what I love to do, until I realized that there was a nice lady. Her name was Karen. And she had just done the Paris Marathon, 6 months prior. And she did it in April or something like that. And she had done it in 5 hours and 20 minutes or something like that. Very respectful for her first marathon. But I knew she had more. I always knew she had more. So instead of me just going out willy-nilly and stuff, I told Karen, I'm like, Karen, you're with me. I said, I have a strategy. We're going to follow the strategy, and we're going to cross the line. And to make a long story short, we crossed hand in hand across the finish line in 4 hours and 32 minutes, which was almost a 50-minute increase in less than 6 months. That's unheard of for a marathon. You don't get that much better in that amount of time. So it's very rare that ever happens. You can take off an hour in 1 year. Half hour, maybe 25 minutes, something like that. But very rarely do you take almost an hour. And we did it in 6 months, just because I recognized it. And that's when her friend told me, she's my